activist and a theologian, and I see the center of my work as doing theological reflection with faith-based activist groups to try to help them remember how they got into their work of peace and justice, and to figure out how to sustain that work in the long run. So a lot of it is reflection work, analytical work, but also pastoral work. And then I'm also a writer and do a fair bit of education in the mainstream churches, trying to call them into the work of the gospel witness of peace and justice. But the center of my heart's work is working with people who are already in the struggle. I was not raised in the church in the U.S. California is where I'm from. But shortly after I heard the gospel and came to the faith, I was immediately sort of disillusioned with the evangelical churches I was hearing and seeing. And fortunately for me, was introduced to the radical discipleship movement, which was a movement in the mid-1970s that really was centered both in the U.S. and in Australia, where my friend Paul is from. It was a movement that was really trying to talk about the whole gospel for the whole person, for the whole world. And that is what really grabbed my attention. And then it was through meeting some radical Catholics, particularly in the Catholic worker movement in the United States, as well as radical Baptists and radical Methodists and so on, that really influenced my experience of what the faith calls us to. You know, I came into the movement in the mid-1970s, and that was just before the dawn of the Reagan-Bush era, really. 1980 is when Ronald Reagan comes to power in the U.S. And so it's been pretty tough slugging as far as any social justice movement, but particularly faith-based social justice, because not only has the political milieu moved to the right, but also the ecclesial conversation has moved more conservatively, as your listeners know. So there's been lots of discouragement, but there has been plenty to be encouraged by. I think I would probably name three things. One would be the solidarity movements of the 1980s, which were primarily focused on Central America, but also, in my experience, also in Asia and the Pacific. There was a whole generation of concerned Christian folk who got involved in international solidarity work, from the sanctuary movement, working with refugees from the Central American wars, which my community was involved in helping start in the early 1980s, to the nuclear-free and independent Pacific movement in the Pacific Basin that I was deeply involved in, working with indigenous people all throughout the Pacific. So I think the sort of expansive consciousness of faith-based activists in the 1980s was a real high water mark. That includes the Witness for Peace movement, in which Christian folk went from North America to places like Nicaragua to try to get in the way of the war that was going on between the Nicaraguan Contras and the Nicaraguan people. So all those, I think, were significant movements. The 1990s were considerably harder, I think, for faith-based social justice work. But a lot of the significant work that took place on the ground in poor neighborhoods. In 1992 was the Los Angeles Uprising, which is the largest civil disturbance riot in U.S. history. And at that time I was working in low-income communities in the Los Angeles area. And I think many of those of us who were involved in international solidarity work in the 80s sort of found ourselves deeply involved in local organizing and solidarity with poor people at home. And there was a lot of good work done in the 1990s, even while, in many ways, the economy was regressing and the politics were moving to the right. Presently, I think I've been encouraged by a couple of things. One is something called the New Sanctuary Movement, which we are involved in now in the Southern California area, and it's a national movement in the U.S. in which undocumented immigrants families who are in the process of deportation by a U.S. immigration policy which requires the deportation of undocumented parents even if the children are citizens, which we think is really counterintuitive. There's no way that that's going to help the social fabric to separate children from their families. So we have started a process of bringing some of these families into sanctuary in congregations around the country, because there's sort of an unspoken agreement that the Immigration Naturalization Service will not invade a church sanctuary to deport or take off people. So that's a movement called the New Sanctuary Movement. We're trying very hard to put a human face on the immigration question in the U.S. No, come on along. Just step quietly, you'll be fine.
Thank you, though, for your consideration.
Yeah,
Very
thanks.
kind of you.
Appreciate it. So that's that movement. That's one point of hope for me right now. The second point of hope for me would be a process that my wife and I have been involved in, which is called the Truth and Reconciliation Project in Greensboro, North Carolina. It's the first time that the Truth and Reconciliation process, which was famously pioneered in South Africa, has come to the United States. It has to do with the murder of 5 labor activists by the Ku Klux Klan and Nazis in 1979 that happened in this stalwart southern town in North Carolina. And the victims of that shooting, the spouses of people who were shot and also people who were wounded, have been working on a grassroots version of a TRC that has had extraordinary ripples sent throughout the national scene, and we've been very, very pleased and proud to be advisors to that project. It's a very, very significant project in which North Americans who are notorious for not facing their historical past are having to try to learn the truth about past racist behavior and economic discrimination. So those are some of the high points. There are good things that have happened.